talk it like in the oral tradition, oral history, but we can also paint it, dance it, and have mass media sing it, the performing arts, the literary arts, etc. So that's what this is about today. But I would like to bring to your attention before we go on, tickets I have on sale for Thursday. We're having our Meg Everest Day, and as a culminating activity to Meg Everest Day, we're taking a look at the gospel and blues expression or expressions as a way of preserving our heritage. Okay? Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, some of you may know of him as the minister at Canaan Baptist Church in Manhattan. He's also a civil rights activist. He will be our guest lecturer. He has a degree in ethnomusicology. Okay? So he will be leading us in that. And we have several gospel groups coming as well as a blues group and a folk music group. So it should be very interesting. The tickets are only $2. Do I have a sale right here? Yeah, come on. Somebody come. Doors open at 6. Performance begins at 7. Persuade your teacher to bring you. Why not? Like today. Okay, well, some of you have family members, etc., who could come. And you could make it like an outing after your class, and you meet up with them. I have students who said that that's what they're going to do. They're giving tickets or they're purchasing tickets for their parents, for their siblings, for friends, okay, and having them come to the concert, and they'll meet with them after class, okay? So that's always a way, all right? Then we also have the play, The Meeting, coming on March 5. March 5, The Meeting. My ticket sales person is at the door. I'm selling these. Okay. They also, if you have your student ID with you, it's $2. For those of you without IDs or friends without IDs, it's $5. Okay? That's cheap. You can't get it like that off Broadway, can you? How is it going, Professor Siam, with the roundtable discussion? We're every reservation is filled. Okay. Some of us will be fortunate tomorrow to go to an Ethiopian restaurant where we'll have the first, I hope, of many roundtable discussions. This one will be with Ethiopians and Americans discussing common issues, etc. And Dr. Siam has arranged for us to go to a restaurant. We bought it out. And it really is, I'm looking forward to it. There are other activities also. The Black History Month calendars are as you come in. And I hope some of you will sign up to do an entry for the essay contest. The essay contest is not that difficult. It's 2 to 3 pages. You have 4 questions to choose from. You write on one of them. There are cash prizes. The deadline is March 2nd. March 2nd is the deadline, and we will do the awarding April 11th. Okay, so that gives the review committee time enough to look it over. No, it's not just me who looks at the essays. There's a separate review committee made up of faculty and students and alumni. Okay? I'm trying to wait for the man. Well, why don't we get started? Are you ready for videotaping?
I'm
We're going to
ready.
videotape this. Don't need a camera. Some of our faculty have found it very useful when we have done these lecture series LAS courses and the English courses will find this very useful too. These are not cataloged, and you can't find them through the required catalog, but you can inquire in the Media Services Department, okay? These are what we call uncatalogued items, but we do have a list of the archival videotapes that have been done of programs here at the college. Yes. Oh, hi. Found that a lot of things are right. Marion Shaw, John Mason. You have your and your slides. Your slides you give to him.
You know the product.
Sure. Scheduled tonight was Martha Vega, who is the executive director of the Caribbean Cultural Center in Manhattan. She was unable to come this evening, so we're very fortunate to have two rather well-known people in the cultural area with us this evening.
Where you gonna project this? To the wall. Okay, there you go.
Do you have your Bible? I'm sorry. I was standing outside for the longest time. Where is it? Yes, sir. You know, like in their own words kind of thing. Are you ready, Oswald? Come on, we want to get this officially on. And I think we better close the door. And kind of rambunctious outside. Well, you should know. Can you move it up a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay. All right, so can we start? No, not yet. Because the first panelist will be Mary.
Oh.
Okay, she doesn't have slides. This is what you call documenting your heritage, so I've got to start with the video. Now, I'm not going to repeat everything I said before, but we have to have it ready. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you to the first in our lecture series, ways of preserving our culture. This is an overview lecture to examine the philosophy behind our African-based culture, as well as what are the ways, the unique ways, the means that we have to pass on our culture, how our forebears have done it, how we're doing it today, or what we should be doing today for our youth in the future. Today is February 27th, and we're at MEC College. Woo! This is February 24th at MEC College in the Shabazz Lounge. We have two panelists replacing Martha Vega from the Caribbean Cultural Center. The first panelist will be Marion Glenn Straw. Marion considers herself a product of the cultural and educational resources of New York City via West Point, Mississippi. She is a graduate of Queens College, received her BA in 1965, Hunter College with her master's in 1972, and was a recent fellow at Columbia University in 1984. Marion is also a professional artist and has exhibited throughout the Northeast. She is currently preparing for her 9th one-woman show. In addition to her artistic endeavors, Marion is an arts administrator focused on developing programs and services for and about the African American. She was the Cultural Affairs Coordinator for the Langston Hughes Community Library and Cultural Center of Queensborough Public Library, the Director of the Cultural Voucher Program at the Museums Collaborative, and is presently Executive Director of ACBA, Center for the Arts, located in Mount Vernon, New York. Our second presenter is Dr. John Mason? Okay, John Mason. John Mason has a very interesting and varied background in African and African American studies. He has been an instructor in music culture for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies in CUNY in New York. He's also been a music consultant, and in his professional activities from 1973 to 75, he worked with the Conjunto Union, which is an Afro-Latin jazz ensemble dedicated to performing in Black and Puerto Rican communities. He's also a specialist and researcher in the music of Cuba, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Trinidad, Brazil, Nigeria, and Ghana. I am a drum maker and designer, he says. Currently, he has taken leave from his job or his employment and is doing extensive research and publishing, especially bringing out new editions of, what is it, 1 or 3 or 2? 4. Oh. Of his reprinting at least 4 of his books that are out of print. One of them is in our bookstore at this time. So I'd like to start the program now with Marion Straw. So would you give Marion a welcome?
Thank you very much. It's quite nice to be here talking to students who are interested in ways in which they can preserve their culture. When I was at Queens, I was a history education major, and I had a girlfriend who was about to graduate, now is like a sophomore, and she said to me, I asked her what was she going to do, and she said she was going down to Howard to study Black history. And I said, why would you do that? And when she got through with me, I had a very good knowledge of why she was going to Howard to study Black history. We are all products of the environment in which we live. We live in a majority culture that does not really look at, or did not look at, the ways in which the African American was truly a part of the American scene. You say that I am an American, and you take in all that America has to offer. We have bought wholesale the mythologies of the American environment. And I say that with very real feeling, with the fact that we have not come to terms with who we are as a very distinct people. We say we are African American. Most of us cannot say that we are Nigerian American, or Moroccan American, or Zaire American, or Ethiopian American, or any of the specifics of Africa. And because we cannot, there is a major identity problem. Who are we? Where do we come from? What kind of lifestyle did we have when we look to the African continent? And when we look to the Americas, how do we live here? Many of us would say that we don't live any differently from other folks, that our contributions are not any different from other people's. They are. They are quite unique. They're wonderful. It is only when we come to terms with the African American experience and value those things which are truly our own that we can then say we are American with a very special sense of pride. I grew up in Mississippi, where my early years were spent in Mississippi. My grandmother lived out in the backwoods of Mississippi. She didn't have electricity or running water or that kind of thing. So it was always a lot of fun to go visit my Mamie. Her yard was, she had 2 magnolia trees in her front yard. The dirt was basically red Mississippi clay. She would know that we were coming, and she would take a twig broom and sweep her yard. Now, it's no big deal. You know, she swept the yard with a twig broom. But she did this on purpose whenever she knew that we were coming. And when we got out of the car, you would say, "Oh, my Mamie, it looks so pretty." You know, you would hate to put your footprints on the patterns that she had drawn in the clay. And she would say, "Oh, babe, now is the time that you walk across the yard." You know, and we didn't pay it too much mind, but it's a memory that comes back with a great deal of feeling. I went to a conference about 3 years ago and learned that what she was doing was very much in the West African tradition of sweeping the clay yard with a twig broom and making patterns. The same thing with the way she made a quilt top. We would say, well, you know, my Mamie knew how to make quilts. But her quilts were always the kind where she would start with the pattern, and then somehow that pattern got jazzed up with her own thing. Then she would go back to the pattern. And we would say, "My Mamie tried." Again, at the American Folk Arts Museum, listening to a lecture, I was told about the African American quilting tradition. We take the patterns and we do our thing with them. We've got to add that special signature. So when I came home, I went to my mother and I said, "You know, I want to see the other quilts from my Mamie." And she said, why? You didn't value them before. Why are you so charged up now wanting my Mimi's quilts? I said, because they really are truly special. And we did not value those quilts because we did not understand that the African American quilting tradition is very different from those of other groups. And so on and so on and so on. We keep looking at ourselves in terms of that dominant culture without recognizing the fact that we do hear a different rhythm. It doesn't make it any less valid. It doesn't make it better. It is just an expression of a people who have lived through some very hard times. The same thing with our art. If I sound as though that I'm giving you a personal lecture, I can't help but do that because all of these experiences have shaped the kind of person that I am. It's shaped the content, for example, of my art. I never identified with the slave mother until I became a mother. And then I used to walk around with my baby on my shoulder, treasuring this miracle baby like nobody else had ever had a baby before. And it hit me that in the slave system, I would not have authority over this child. And it became a one-on-one kind of identity. And the only way that I could get rid of that horror was to paint it. And I did a whole series of pieces entitled, Oh, My Children. I could not get away from that. The pain, the horror, not knowing who family is, and yet we as a people have always bonded together. We've always had the extended family, for example. And Miss Ann down the street would always be looking out for you, and God forbid if you did something wrong because your mother would know it. And it's something that we need to re-emphasize, look at, and honor the people within our communities who don't have doctorates, who don't have fancy degrees, but who always had the milk and cookies and the open bathroom for you if your mother or father were not at home. It is something that we tend to forget. The kinds of churches that we had, the kinds of social organizations that we used to form, or that we formed long ago, trying to create a life in a very strange and hostile environment. Up at Akbar presently, we have an exhibition entitled So We Too, African Roots, American Strength. And part of that exhibit is to emphasize the fact that, with the exception of the Native American, everyone is an immigrant in America. We tend to forget that. We're the only people as a race who came here by force. It was not a chosen immigration. Nonetheless, we are here, and as the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. We have truly multiplied. We have endured. That word endure and perseverance and hope and fear. We have recreated, for example, the conditions of the Middle Passage. And you can go in a closet, get on a shelf that's 13 inches wide, 6 feet long, and 19 inches apart. There are 3 of them. Lie down and hear the sounds of the sea. Now imagine coming from a village, walking to a coast, never having seen the ocean, never having seen a boat like the one you're being placed on, and never having seen white people. You never knew if they were going to eat you or what, because there was no experience to account for what you were about to go through. Our people endured. And through that endurance, we have many survivals that we do not value, that we have not taken into account. Their grave markers, there's the food, there's the hairstyle. I saw a little white girl yesterday where I live with cornrow hair, and I loved it. I just loved it, you know. I said, hey, right on. And so on. There are many things that we have, that we do. I am not going into the specifics, but to say to you that everyone here has some knowledge of their family, or friends, or an idea. Some of us have more ideas than others, but we all have something that we can investigate, that we can look at in detail, and add to our personal knowledge. Many of you, in terms of writing your term papers, can pick topics and areas of concern that will add to the body of knowledge that we have about ourselves. These papers and things do not have to be doctoral papers, you know. In an English class, the main thing is that you have your general statement and 3 specifics written in a grammatical way and all of that kind of thing. The point is that when you make something personal, it becomes exciting, and you then can move with a certain zest towards doing a paper or a project. I sit on the NISCA panel, the New York State Council for the Arts panel, for special arts services. And this is the panel that is supposed to make sure that minority arts organizations receive fair treatment from the state. Minority now includes the Russian, your Nordic people, as well as your Native American, your African American, and others. It is a very broad category. When initially it was set up to handle primarily your Latino and African American organizations. One of the exciting aspects of being on that panel, and I hope you picked up the fact that I am indirectly stating a protest about how minority is now interpreted, but they had one of the, it's a Brooklyn organization that is doing a dance program based on the traditions coming out of Guatemala. And this is an African tradition that has been preserved. I don't remember the name of it, which is, well anyway, I don't remember the name of it, but I was struck by the fact that here, in terms of the people from the Caribbean and Central America, preserving and focusing on those traditions which are now part of their customs and that come out of an African focus. I read the book, In Search of Our Brother, and this was written by 2 men from Yale who went down to Suriname to look for the survivals that they had heard about, the languages and the customs that were clearly identified with West Africa. When they arrived in the village of these people, one of the chiefs said to them, "Did you not win your war?" And first the men didn't know what they were talking about, and then they realized they were talking about the Civil War. And so he said yes. So the next question was, why then do you wear the slave master's clothes? And that's a heavy. Because most of us, in terms of who we are and what we do, and I was very guilty of that, the 3-piece suit, you know, we complained about the men always wearing the same outfit, you know, the same colors and always always looking so mundane. And we as women, when we get into those executive positions, we wear the three-piece suit, you know, and have the nerve to put on the bow tie, you know, and God forbid you have a green or a purple jacket. Folk are wondering, what is your problem? I decided several years ago that in terms of my heritage, I would have to be me. And I'd have to wear what I want to wear when I want to wear it. And as a result of that, I wear primarily African-style clothing. I have my three-piece suits, for some things you can't give up, especially when you're fundraising. You don't really want to create a problem for yourself, and yet you shouldn't even have to consider that. But I have my three-piece suit with African fabric, or in a style that's going to relate to my African-American content. And I make no apology for it. It's very important. Many of us now are wearing kente cloth, you know, the strips or the kufi, and what have you. I recently attended a wedding where the men in the wedding party had on the kente cloth and the groom wore hula. And an African dancer danced in the aisle of the church to the sound of the talking drum. You know, that's heavy. It's not normally done. We're not exposed or experienced in rituals that take into account all of these factors. They even jump the broom. And I got a little upset because I thought the jumping the broom came out of a slave tradition, when in actuality it's a West African tradition that was maintained. So you see how we're all victims of interpretation. And I'm saying, with all of that African beauty, why would they highlight a slave thing? You know, really got on my soapbox, only to be told that I was very wrong, and so on. I say to you that preserving our roots is very important. Preserving the roots in terms of your family history, your family traditions, your individual cultures, and there are several different cultures within this room. Preserving those is very important. I say to you that as African Americans, in an environment that can be extremely hostile, we have to focus on that which is positive for us, for our children. As one last anecdote, my son grew up out at the Langston Hughes Community Library and Cultural Center, and he was a very precocious kind of kid. His thing was to make straight for the books, lie down on the rug, and read. When we moved, and he was using the library near where we lived, he came back and he said, "Mom, they don't have any books." And I said, "Clyde, yes, they do." He said, "No, Mom, they don't have our books." And I said, "Well, then you go to the librarian and complain that they do not have books that reflect you and what you are used to. Because out in Langston, whether he was reading a cookbook, a sports book, an arts book, a story, it was written by a black person or about a black person. If he read stories, they dealt with urban children, with skyscrapers and that kind of thing. A tremendous influence on his mental development, so that it's kind of hard to deal with Clyde now because his head is yay big. You know, he has a very real sense of who he is, does not apologize for his blackness in any form or fashion, and has gone from wanting to be an accountant to majoring in black history. And I consider that a major coup. And with that, I thank you.
They know nothing about the immediate past. You go into the schools and you ask the civil rights movement, who were some of the people in the forefront? They don't know. That's our immediate past. Regardless of our distant past as slaves. So we're the ones that are responsible for preserving. And this is the kind of thing that we should be telling our youth. What our experiences have been, what our forefathers and mothers' experiences have been. Along this line, we also have to realize that we have a philosophical and religious base upon which we exist. I don't know how many of you know that the Yoruba religion is here as well as in Africa. John Mason is a priest of the Yoruba theology, and I would like for him now to come forward. Thank you.
Well, pretty soon we're going to turn the lights out. Usually I let the slides do the talking. No, move on for a second. I'll sort of give you a preamble as to what I'm going to talk about. For the last 25 years, last quarter of a century, I've been very lucky. I have been involved in the forefront, vanguard, of critical research that's been happening in this country, happening in Brazil, happening in places like West Africa, Nigeria, University of Peabody, University of Ife. And that research deals with the fact that, as my colleague pointed out, the question always arose, what African am I? Which African am I? And as a historian, as a trained historian, my basic problem started from that point. It's like, okay, how do I define myself and then define my family, my children, and my friends, and all things that I consider important. Basically what happens then, we go to our history. We go to history, not just as written, but most history more than 30 years ago about African people written by non-Africans, Europeans who were either travelers. There are many travel laws, they almost get unbelievable in their scope. And or professionals, anthropologists, people, many people attached with, quote, missionary movements that moved into, quote, dark Africa. But basically, the thing that we should keep in mind is that out of every 100 Africans that landed in the New World, 99 came from a strip of Africa, approximately 700 miles from coast to interior, stretching from Senegal and Mali in the north all the way down to Angola in the south. It's a tremendous tract of land. Another thing that we have to keep in mind, that we're talking about the 99% of us are West Africans, so that at least narrows it down. We know that we didn't come from North Africa, we didn't come from East Africa, we didn't come from South Africa. 99 out of 100 of us came from West Africa. In that corridor that I described to you, and I don't have a map for, in that corridor, another important thing to keep in mind when we think about our diversity, or the things that might keep us apart, they always use the word when they talk about Africans' tribe. And there are certain words that carry with it a lot of baggage, as you say. So that if I say that, your tribe, or so that we say 99 out of every African American to come here, African Caribbean, to reach the new world comes from West Africa, then we also have to realize that those 99 individuals shared an ancient common tongue. At one time in West Africa, everybody spoke. This is not, we can't say, well, with a granite block. But at one time, more or less, everybody spoke the same language. It's what they call the Kwa Niger language group. We all come from the same language group. What does that mean? It means that we weren't babbling at each other, as some biblical tales will tell you, or some biblical projections will imply that somehow all of these Africans got in and we were just talking gibberish like monkey talk to one another. Problem is, no. Most of us understood something of what the other was saying. And if we didn't understand implicitly or exactly each word, we understood from a basic formation of ground. We knew what God meant to each of us. We knew what family meant. We knew that age and authority and gray hair counts for something. The fact that you can live to be old is already a testament, a memorial. All right, so the body creates a memorial so that wrinkles and gray hair don't mean that you somehow lost your sense of how to get from A to B in the world. These are fundamental principles that cultures and civilizations base themselves in. If then we share these things in common, what we brought in is no surprise that our presence in the new world has been so infectious and effective. So that not only, we might be still wearing the slave master's clothes, but as a famous, I remember once listening to television, this famous designer said, but all my models have to be black. And the commentator asked him, why? He said, because they know how to wear clothes. This idea of style is something that we brought not only to music and art. I've just finished a very large book that's taken quite a bit of my life to complete. And it's a book on music and song. And one of the most important things that we have to consider is that in Western art, over the last 300 years, whether that be plastic arts, in terms of sculpture, in terms of painting, in terms of music, if you do not look to Africa for the source, for their inspirational source, then you miss the point. They're not playing Chinese music, all right? They're not, when they talk about doing the moon, when Michael Jackson does a moonwalk, and you go to places where I travel quite a bit, and you go to other countries and you find people, all they want to know about are certain individuals in our culture, and those individuals are all black. All right, they don't ask about white baseball players, they don't ask about white basketball players, they don't ask about white musicians, they don't, and even in the fields of science, strangely enough, you find that now, even though we've been co-opted by, quote, the multinational corporation, that even there, it's like going to a Chinese restaurant and finding out that the cook is really one of us, who's been co-opted because the old chef died. The basis of it's the basis of scientific endeavor in this country, in many ways, rests upon the backs of black scholars, black inventors, and the understand that there are national realities and regional realities. That when you talk about a continent, which is, I mean, how many United States when you put it into Africa, you have to understand the breadth of this continent. That it's sometimes too easy to call Africa by one name. But, and there are underlying principles that tend to join it all together. When you talk about Egyptian theology, Egyptian mythology, it's very, very similar to West African mythology and theology. The only point that I was making is that in terms of the census, in terms of the actual data that's available to us, we know that only 1% of the Africans of land in the New World came from the eastern sectors. So that, now whether this is, I mean, that could be 2%, but the fact is the overwhelming majority came from this corridor that has been identified.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but, you know, as you pointed out, for example, I can count 7 generations, my father, and so on. And we don't have any family name. Each one has its own given name. And I can say, see you, Gabriel, and after Mariam, and so on, up to 200 people. So I'm married to a black American, because of my influence. Now she's organizing a trip to find out her roots in South Carolina.
It's crucial. It's crucial.
It's a very crucial thing because a tree without a root falls down. So you must know your roots. And which is the importance of roots. Something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I got a comment.
Come on.
I can stay for here.
All right.
Going back to what Ms. Stroh said and relating it to Mr. Mason here, we're living in a society that's not ours, so to speak. And I understand that you're going back to African culture, but the loss of culture is a degenerating process. It happens over time. And the true aesthetics of the culture aren't really kept, meaning you can go back and get some African, but it's not the real thing, you know, as far as what happened in local practice back in the days.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna get to the microphone and
Sure.
answer that, okay? That's not what I meant, okay? What I am promoting is the fact that there is more culture that has been maintained than we are aware of. Because we're not exactly like the majority culture, it is seen that somehow we have lost something, and we are working to gain that majority culture. We don't have to do that. We already have a culture. It is up to us to recognize the validity of that culture. That's the point that I was trying to make. Okay? There's a big difference.
May I say one thing to that?
Huh?
The problem that the point that you're bringing up, it's not actually, it's not true. First, let's start with that. You have to travel to places like West Africa. You can go to Lagos A lot of mothers killed their children. A lot of men went to the torch rather than become anything other than what they were. But the cultural imprint is there. And the culture says, in moderation, let's see what this man's culture is. Let's see what we can bring and what can we take from it. And yet still maintain our identity. That's been happening all throughout the New World. You have to go to a place like Brazil. In Brazil, you talk about African culture, it's exactly African culture. It's more African in certain parts of Brazil, certain parts of Cuba, certain parts of Trinidad, certain parts of Jamaica, all right, the island of Jamaica, than they are in Africa. Why? Because you have a certain kind of preservation that took place in the New World. People, we are very conservative here. Very conservative. Don't change that. Let's keep it this way. Why? Because it's our memory. It's the only thing we have of the past. There are certain things that are done in the New World that Africans quote, because we are African. I don't understand how it is that all of a sudden we don't become Africans anymore. We are still Africans. Look at all the color of these people's skins, and you will have to say that they're Africans. I don't care what kind of a rose by any other name, it's still a rose. There's no, if that I don't care what kind of Gucci pants you put on, you put them onto an African body. And sooner or later, some memory, some quirk, something makes you tilt it in an African way.
Yeah. I'd like to make a comment on that because we had a lecture series 2 years ago that dealt with African culture in the Americas. And what we were looking at were the commonalities, how the cultural traditions came to this country. They weren't lost. They were reconstructed in our subconscious, okay? So that you see African tradition, African art, African religion propping up all over wherever you saw Africans in the Americas with a lot of similarities.
Go see the Daughters of the Dust.
Yeah.
That's right here, right off the Georgia seacoast. What do you
That's
think?
right.
Those people are still working just the way African, except they're working. All cultures move. Africans are no different. With me, we're not going to walk around and talk about throwing spears. Matter of fact, I got bad news for you. We didn't do a lot of that. You know, we invented many, many technologies that the world doesn't want to admit to. Right?
Ornaments and things of that nature.
Oh, come on. There are books and books and books on this subject.
Yes.
From the French colony, our father from the African culture than for the black people.
Why is it that people are from
The
the
French colony,
French
yeah,
colonies
yeah, our father, like I'm thinking,
are further away from African culture than others? Do you really think so?
yeah, I'm thinking about anything, like, I'm not saying people that dress like that or, you know,
Oh. Yeah, but what part of Haiti you from?
Port-au-Prince, yeah.
Port-au-Prince. I used to live in Peshawar. Right above, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You go to Cape Etienne, and how can I explain this? The most important thing that I have to know is who and what created everything. All right, let's start with that. If the Haitian hasn't kept that, he hasn't kept anything. He's kept this idea about God. I mean, why do you think they don't want? Why do you think that Haiti has never been accepted into the family of the Americas? Because they beat the best army in the world of its time. They were the first to create revolution. They were the first to export revolution. So that there were pressures on that culture, which made it it had to look at itself in a different way. But the underpinning of that culture is pure African. It's pure. Matter of fact, in terms of the rest of the Western world, in terms of the Caribbean hemisphere, forget it. Haiti is probably one of the most potent places where I don't have to wear this to be an African.
Okay.
All right? It's nice because we have other agendas. We have children just walking, you can crush them. But it happened. Now, what happens in that type of situation? It happened all throughout the Caribbean. In Cuba, you had, they always said, oh, the majority population was white. Boom. If you had 300,000 slaves, say you had 500,000 slaves. They never tell you that you had 300,000 free black people living at the same time in the same island. There was never a black minority. You cannot control that many people. So what do? You allow them to do their thing. Yeah, you can have just feast days. The same thing they did in the South. The blacks did not outnumber the whites in the South. Of course they did. But they set up rules, regulations, Jim Crow, all these things so that, and they brainwash you. I come up to a young student and say, my dear, stop doing that. I might get cursed out. There's a tendency, if a white person did that, from our brainwashing in this culture, you tend to stop first. Same thing. It's a control mechanism.
That's right.
I'm glad that you said that because I am from Central America, from Queens, and I have been trying to explain this to a lot of Afro-Americans here in New York, that the slaves there were given guns and land because they outnumbered the white
Yeah, but you had the same thing in the South here. The difference here in the
But
United
still they
States.
retain that African cultural situation because I had great grand aunts who I can remember who looked like a woman
Oh, sure.
that wore that same kind of clothing.
But you had the same thing here in this country. There was a different reality in the United States. In the United States, what they wanted to do was this. They wanted to create a regenerating stock. The idea when you came to the U.S. as a slave was not to work you to death, but to breed you like cows and horses to get the best produce, the best return on your money. Okay? That was not the case in the majority, matter of fact, the overwhelming majority of the sugar market. Under Spain, the idea was there's always more in Africa. In Brazil, the same thing. There was always more. Remember,
Because it was the more. After a while, you could not bring slaves in. You could not
that
sell,
was
bring them in.
that was only from about 1850 to 1865 that they stopped importing, supposedly. Remember, slavery didn't end in Brazil until 1888. And in Cuba, 1886. That's a little over 100 years ago. There are people alive who remember their mothers being slaves. So that it's a different kind of context. But don't count the United States out in that. Because you go to the South, you get it.
Okay, we got two people here I want to jump in on this. And before I let you go, one of the things that I think we really need to do, we become isolationists in the metropolitan New York area. We need to go out, travel. When I went to New Orleans, they have, in one of the museums in New Orleans, I shouldn't say New Orleans, it's New Orleans. They have pictures showing the slaves doing the drumming and doing the dancing because even though they outnumbered the whites, they were permitted on Sundays to go and do their dances and do their religion, etc. Okay? You have other areas, Williamsburg, okay, in Virginia, where slaves were permitted to do their thing. Eventually, they could even buy their freedom, okay? They were permitted to work. Remember, Frederick Douglass in Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, was let out to a shipping firm in Baltimore, Maryland, so that he could, what, cork the ships.
But see, that's not the overall picture that Afro-Americans get.
Because, as I said, who are you talking to? New Yorkers. Okay? New Yorkers, and this is a picture that is pervasive throughout this country, that New Yorkers are isolationists in that way. We are parochial in that manner. That's why I said we have to move out and see. Try our library. We have some books on slavery and other this country besides New York. Okay, you have a comment to make.
I'm from the South, and this young lady right here, she's looking at it as New York point of view. But there's a lot of southern states, people live just like they live in Africa.
No, I'm saying about the interaction I get from people here in New York. Their behavior, the behavior of Afro-Americans.
This is
Not
New
how I
York.
look at it, because I look at it from where I come from.
This
And
is
I
New York.
experienced that lifestyle like a Cuban woman. I have experienced that.
Yes, Miriam, and then the gentleman in the back.
I think I will let mine go. I wanted to tell my friend here, I've been in a couple of classes with him, that if he wants to know more about West Africa, I'm available at all times. Because, I mean, for instance, there are a lot of Asians around where I live. And almost every time when I walk by, somebody starts to speak the Creole or whatever they call it to me. You know, and not me alone. Other Africans, every time they think they're Africans. I don't know why. Yeah, they think they are, Asians. So I could, one-to-one conversation with him, I could very yes.
Okay, Miriam?
In answer to the point that you're raising, I think part of what you're getting is the fact that we are still caught up in integrating and still caught up in being part of the great I am. When I first came here, it was like, you don't tell anybody you're from Mississippi. You know, and I have relatives to this day that give me a hard time because I am forever saying, yay, Mississippi. You know, it's where I come from. It might have been Hell's Kitchen, but for me, it was a place of joy. My family was still intact. And by the time I left, I was of an age that the horror of Mississippi hadn't come home yet. So when Emmett Till was lynched, it was like, that can't be where I come from. And my mother had a hard time making me understand, yes, Marion, that's where we come from. This whole thing of integrating and of being part of the status quo, meaning that general kind of thing, you know, where you talk the King's English, you dress the King's style, and, you know, so forth and so on. We get very caught in that. And you tend to want to whitewash your background, where you've come from, because it's not sophisticated. You know, it's become more popular now to be who you are and to say it with pride. It's more accepted. I wear an afro. In my family, it was not accepted. You know, I used to have the pressed hair and the long hair and the curls and sitting in the hairdresser. And one day I looked in the mirror and I cut. And my husband came home and he said, well, gee, the baby couldn't have been that bad. You know? And I said, no, his mother just got tired and I cut. You know, and it was a whole thing of living with my nappy hair. You know, coming to terms with my nappy hair. My brother, my mother, you know, were very upset with me when I cut off my hair. More, not so much the politics, but coming to terms with my blackness, being who I am. When I told the people in my office that I was going to get a fro, they looked at me like, you don't look awful. And I said, really? Yeah, this is before I got it. You're going to really look awful. I said, sweetheart, do you know how much money I spend trying to look like you? wear is acceptable. When I was coming through as a young person, it was not acceptable. And you had a whole lot of horror to go through. My husband was from Barbados. And we had been at his grandmother's house visiting, and I kept saying, yes, Nanny, no, Nanny. And after we left, I said, does Nanny have a speech impediment? So he looked at me and said, well, yes, but more than that, she has a West Indian accent. I said, West Indian? He said, yeah. I said, in West Indian? He said, yes, Mary, I'm North West Indian. I got home, I said, Mom, I got something to tell you, and I don't want to hear a word about it. Flies West Indian. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'll tell your grandfather. I had heard negatives about West Indians and did not realize Granddaddy was talking about black folk. It never occurred to me that he would be speaking about blacks. I automatically assumed that West Indians were white folk. You know, because when I looked, the accent didn't mean anything to me. It was the color of your skin. And we were all black together. So that was a rude awakening, that there were West Indians who were black people. And then this whole thing with accent, with different culture, just like you're saying in terms of being more aware of your Africanness. Some of us would see that as you're being less sophisticated. You haven't been around Americans enough not to have an accent. Like, what should it matter? But this is all part of that whole process with the exhibit that we're doing now, of realizing that we all went through the West Indies first. Everybody. And then you were shipped wherever. You know, we all have that common root and the diversity that goes with that commonality of experience.
Are there any more questions, comments? I would just like to bring this evening's program to a closure, to thank you very much for your patience, because we did start late, and I hope that this was informative to you, and that you will encourage your fellow students and your family and friends to come out for our next lecture. The next one is this Thursday with Reverend Y.T. Walker. From then on, it will be alternate Mondays through the month of May. All right, and then we'll pick up again in the fall, at the end of September. I also want to invite you to our joint Women's History Month and Black History Month committees opening a photographic exhibit. I have the invitation here. It will be this coming Monday from 6 to 8 in the library. Dr. Alfred Famemi, Famemi is the photographer. There will be about 30 pieces in the exhibit. So I hope you will come out to greet him. And you can pick up exhibit copies of the invitation on the way out. Thank you again, and have a safe trip home.